Hikaru Nakamura and Daniil Dubov were facing each other in the finals of the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge 2020. Hikaru Nakamura had a splendid tournament. He finished first in the prelims and then he eliminated Levan Aronian and Magnus Carlsen to reach here in the finals, whereas Daniil Dubov finished 7th and eliminated Sergei Karyakin and Ding to reach the finals. It was a massive upset for a few people that Hikaru Nakamura, after drubbing of 3-0, as I kept repeating it again and again, it was basically unbelievable, that 3-0 drubbing that he got from Carlsen and then bouncing back, winning the second set and then forcing the set 3 into an Armageddon and winning that and then reaching the finals was something else. So Hikaru is back. Daniil Dubov is also back for set 1 of the finals of the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge 2020. So there we go. Hikaru in the first game is black. Beg your pardon. Hikaru is black. Daniil Dubov is white. So Daniil Dubov opens with 1d4, c4, e6, knight f3, d5. I was correct the first time. Hikaru is black, so I wanted to take white's name first, but I took the black's name, so pardon me. So this is okay. Back to the game. So this is anti-Nimzo Indian. Queen's Gambit declined. Knight c3 is invitation to Ragozin. Bishop b4, but he sticks for this 3-knight attack by playing bishop e7, bishop g5, h6 just to give some room for the king. After castling, that would be better. Bishop h4, tucking back. Normally you might see bishop f4 also, or bishop f4 straight away. Both systems are quite acceptable. Now castles, queen c2, preparing e4, but black strikes in the center with c5, attacking this pawn. And also after this exchange, this cross exchange, things might get a little bit heated up in the center. So d takes c5, d takes c4, e3 preparing bishop takes, knight a6 preparing knight takes, bishop takes, knight takes, and Dubov castles, a6 to stop knight b5 things. Rook fd1 challenging the queen, and yeah, if queen c7 then bishop here is very annoying, wastes time, so plays queen e8. So here it cannot be attacked by any of the white pieces, but this puts queen into a passive position with running very little on squares, and that can be unpleasant for for black, that matters, excuse me. Bishop tucks back to e2, and now b6. If he had pushed b5, that would have been nice because that a pawn would have been protected, but b6 was somewhat, I think, forgetting that bishop also defends. But you have to remember that if this bishop moves from here, then there is this capture which can tamper the pawn structure of black, or we should say hamper the pawn structure of black. So that's not ideal. Anyway, b4, kicking the knight away. Knight goes to d7, knight c d7, knight d4. Everything is sorted up to now, but b6 has suddenly created some problems for black, because now this c6 square is available and bishop b7 may not be moved to play at the moment, because if this knight moves, then knight c6 becomes really annoying. If you play rook c8, then if you play rook c8, then rook c1 is very strong. So bishop b7, stopping knight c6, queen b2, preparing rook c1, rook c8, b5. So this was very surprising for Nakamura. He didn't expect this. After a5, Dubov plays knight a4 here, and knight c6 is very interesting. Let's see what happens if he plays knight c6. But then comes bishop takes, b takes, rook has to capture the pawn, bishop b5, and rook c5. So you can see white is a pawn up, but there is a tension here of this. Obviously you cannot play bishop takes f6. If you do, then this is better for black, because after this queen d8 and bishop a4 is actually winning for black. The knight was pinned, and there we go, the rook drops. But after rook c5, now white can play knight a4, and after rook h5, bishop g3, this queen is pinned, this knight is pinned to the queen, so the queen comes out of the pin. Very good move, probably forced. Rook a c1, knight c5. Since there is no b pawn or c pawn, then this knight sits very well here. And if you take the pawn on b6, well, this doesn't change one thing, because after knight b7, bishop e2, the position is still playable for both sides. Nothing significant coming out of it. At first glance it looks like knight is pinned, but knight can easily come to b5 or a4, not a4, but on c4, and knight protects the queen. So there you have it. After a5 he plays knight a4. Knight c6 would have been another possibility. Knight a4 still not bad, but then comes knight d5 exchanging on e7, and comes bishop f3. Well, rook a c1 could have been tried just to activate the rook, but bishop f3 ain't bad either. Knight c5, knight takes, and rook is active now at the moment. Now knight c6 doesn't work, because after bishop takes, b takes, suddenly this pawn is running out of defenders, and queen c7 picks this pawn up. It doesn't matter what you play, queen takes c6 is going, and no c pawn, so this knight cannot be targeted that easily, even though it's pinned. So now rook takes, queen takes, and black is a pawn up in this position. And this position is very good for black, because now also you have to remember this, there is no back rank issues for black. Certainly there are some back rank issues for white. Bishop takes, e takes, rook c1 attacking the queen, queen d6, keeping an eye on this b6 square, defending that. g3 making room for the king, rook d8, and here he could have played queen d4, because now this pawn is looking really threatening to play d4, and things can turn very nasty indeed, but he doesn't deal with it very well. Queen b5, and now the threat was d4, and threat is executed. d4, e takes, and queen takes d4, protecting the pawn. Not only that, it stops this queen to come here and and try to defend this well, and suddenly this queen can control this long diagonal, and it's not easy to play this position. If queen c6, then rook d5, and suddenly queen e4 is coming, and the position is already hopeless. But he plays rook c6 to attack this pawn twice, missing one opportunity, queen e4, and if you take it, then rook d1 is decisive. So you cannot take the pawn anyway. Threat is rook d1, so rook c1 comes back to defend the back rank, and queen f3 prepares rook d1. So if this happens, then rook d1. So he plays queen b1. But now he can straight away go, let's say he can play a4, b5 sort of thing, try to divert this white queen. That would have been better, but he plays g6. Still things are in black's hands, not gone anywhere. h4, try to solve the back rank issues. Rook d6, possibly again a4, b5 would have been an option. Rook d6 is way too conservative in this, in my opinion. Queen a1, threatening this nasty thing, and These are some little cheeky tactics that players tend to miss, and Queen A1 is one of them. King H7, getting rid of this check. So now Rook C8 doesn't come with check, and that threatens Rook D1. So if Rook leaves the back rank, then Rook D1 is on the cards. Queen B1 again, H5 from Nakamura, Rook E1, A4, and now the last thing that White wanted is to get rid of this Rook because of this extra pawn, and this 2-1 majority on the Queen side, Black will rob through White's single-handedly, or I should say dominatingly, which is what happened. Queen B4, and this forces, or I should say not forces, but this allows Black to exchange rooks by playing Rook D1. Rook takes D1 is forced. Queen takes D1, comes with check and defends the pawn on A4, which means that this pawn and with the combination of this pawn can become absolutely deadly. And after King H2, Queen C2, if he takes this pawn, then Black gobbles up this pawn, which is what happened here. Queen takes B6, possibly Queen F4 making pressure here, but that wouldn't have helped anyway because Queen takes A2 would have taken care of this F7 pawn also. Queen takes A2, and what a position here. This Queen is not only supporting this pawn, but is also defending the pawn on F7. Fantastic. Excuse me. Queen F6, Queen E6, inviting the trade of queens. White cannot afford that. Queen C3, Queen B3 doing the same, but now what does this do? Queen F6, now A3 goes through. G4, if H takes G4, then H5 can be annoying for Black and things can turn complicated, but Queen E6 is a simple move. After Queen F3, A2, Dubov resigns game number 1. Absolutely nothing he can do here. If Queen C3 try to stop the promotion, then comes Queen D6, and on the next turn you play Queen D1 and promote your pawn to a queen. So first game goes to Nakamura. Nakamura is white in the next game. What happens there? We'll go there. So there we go. This is game number 2. Pardon my graphics, but this is what happens when you switch the tabs. So this is game number 2. Hikaru is white, Dubov is black, and as usual Dubov is playing Philidore's defense, and he plays it again. This is all standard stuff. Knight F6, Knight C3, pretty much Scotch defense like, but still D6 is Philidore's. Bishop E7, Bishop C4, castles, nothing fussy happening here. This is all standard development. C6 trying to play D5, Rook E1, keeping an eye on the center. A5 now from Dubov, so he's pressing on the queen side, and what I think is that Dubov going into this opening, going into this system, has checked all the lines, and that's why he's playing them on the board, even against stronger grandmasters as strong as Hikaru or Magnus for that matter. So he's very well versed in this line. A4 stops any nonsense by the A pawn. Knight A6, developing knight that side. Bishop F4, Knight C5, Knight B3, offering to trade the knights. He could have traded the knights, that would have been better, but he goes Knight E6. Bishop tucks back to G3, G6 giving some room to this king, probably this side. E5 just hitting the knight. D takes E5, Bishop takes E5, and now queens were traded, and Rook D8. So he's inviting to trade more pieces, and the position has already a lot of tension here, and it seems like With this underdevelopment of these pieces, rook d8 may be too early to exchange the rooks. But rooks belong to the open file, so this is what he's trying to take the open file. I don't mind. Knight d4, knight goes to e8, knight takes e6, and bishop takes e6, developing bishop like that. Bishop takes, f takes, knight e2, bishop f6, trading more pieces. There we go. So looking at this, and this knight also stops this rook d7. This position still looks a drawish, and with no tension, Dubov should hold on to this. But let's see, the game wasn't over yet. f3, stopping knight here, but that wasn't any other threats. Although this rook would have been passive if rook d7 had played, but still the position would have been draw anyway. King f7, so activating the king. Dubov, knight f4, e5, knight e3, attacking the pawn. Rook e8 defends the pawn. Rook e1 puts more pressure on the pawn. e4, so again inviting a lot of exchanges. Knight c5, b5, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, rook takes e4, then comes rook d8. So aim is to take this rank and try to harass those pawns on the 7th rank. Rooks belong to the 7th rank and the open file. A takes b, c takes b. Now this position is pretty complex because these pawns are far advanced, and black would try to create, by playing b4, a4, try to create a passed pawn on this a file. That would be black's aim. Meantime, this king would like to come here and try to take a lot of squares, also initiating c3 to stop these pawns. And this rook being very active, the position would still look attractive for white, although it would be draw anyway, but it would be white only who would have some chance, because white is a pawn up in this situation. King f2, rook d2 check, rook e2, rook d1, king e3, king e6, c3 stopping this b4 nonsense. Now rook h1, g3, could have played f3 as well. g3 is also super solid. King d5, f4 pushing the pawn as you should, h5, king d3 is centralizing the king, a4, and rook f2, just try to press on f5, and rook f5 check would be on the cards. And here the best move in my opinion was to just wait by playing rook g1. If f5, then you just take, rook takes f5, king c6 defends the pawn, and if you take this pawn, then things won't be very easy. So if you take this pawn, let's say here, then rook g2, and this pawn ain't going anywhere because this will drop, and the drop will check, so to say. So after rook f2 comes rook d1 check, which was a mistake by Dubov. And at this moment, Nakamura had almost 12 minutes to compare Dubov's 25 seconds. So Dubov was running very low on time, and that's why this rook d1 move happened. And all those moves which were made by Dubov in the game were influenced by the time also, and time had a very crucial factor to play in this position. Dubov was running very short of time. Rook d1 check was a blunder. King c2, good move, just putting this king this side rather than this side, otherwise these pawns would have been deadly dangerous with the help of this king. So rook g1, but this is too late. f5, g takes, rook takes, king c4, rook f4 check, king c5, rook h4, defends this pawn, king d5. Now you pick this pawn on h5 like that, and that too with check. king c4 defending the pawn on b5, and this king is already too passive. Rook h4 check, king c5, and now rook d4 cutting this king, and if you play this, then this happens, which is what happened, and rook g1. Now this is very interesting initiative from white. What does he do? He's 2 pawns up in the position, but these two passed pawns are not too far advanced. They are not here or here. They are on third and second rank, and this is very difficult to convert. So what does Hikaru do? He plays h4, and what does he get? He gives the pawn back and places his rook behind the passed pawn. Incredible! This is brilliant. And now he could have played rook g6, maybe that would have prolonged the game, but b4 was just a blackout moment, and understandably Dubov was running very low on time, and he had to be dependent on the increments, and which is what happened here. b4, this was captured, check, king takes, now pushing your pawn h5, a3, and now this is very important. The pawn is defended by this king, and you have to be very careful here. So Nakamura took some time and plays rook h4 check, and he was seen on the camera doing calculations by his lips, or I should say lip reading. He was doing the calculations. Rook h4 check first, then king c5, and it would be a mistake to take this pawn, because then rook takes and then rook a8, and this king is way too slow compared to this one. So what can you do? The pawn is attacked. b4 check, brilliant. b4, brilliant. And what does this do? It places this king at Set-1, and after h6 it cannot make a useful move. Rook g2, king b1 again, just to control this pawn so that this pawn cannot attack. And what does this rook do? It cuts this king off, and so does this pawn, because if this king comes here, then this, and there's no time for this, because h7 is running away with the show. King a4, h7, as I said, rook g1 check, king c2, rook g2 check, king d3, and it was here that Dubov resigned the game. Why did he resign? Let's try this. If he plays a2, a8 queen, and if you queen here, well, how can you queen here? The queen will simply take it. Well, you don't need to take the queen. You have better queen e8, and you can simply play this as well, or maybe not, you just even take the queen straight away. Perhaps that would be better. So game number 2 also goes to Hikaru, so it's 2-0 up. What happens in game 3? There we go. This is the game 3. Dubov is white, so Dubov needs to win this game to keep the set alive. So Dubov plays c4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, 4 knights variation, g3, the king's English, there we go, d5, striking in the center, c takes, knight takes, bishop g2, fianchettoing the bishop, knight b6, this is all very well known. Daniil plays this, and Duda was also seen playing this line in the tournament. Castles, bishop e7, a3 stopping knight b4, and in castles, b4, bishop e6, rook b1, just activating this rook, preparing b5 to kick this knight away, f6, b5, there we go, knight is kicked away, e3, and knight takes f3 check, bishop takes f3, now this pawn is attacked, so rook b8, defends the pawn, d4, just trying to activate this bishop like this, like this and like that, and also striking into the center, taking space in the center, which is what he does. He takes d and queen d7. So he's preparing to play bishop h3. So he goes rook e1 so that bishop h3 doesn't come with a tempo. So he plays it first. Plays rook f e8. Perhaps he could have played bishop f7, maybe to place this, instead of placing that rook, placing that queen on h3 would have been a better option, but nevertheless. a4, bishop comes to f7, a5 kicking the knight to d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, and now bishop f4. So placing this pawn into a pin, so if this threatening b6 and this happens, then the pawn is pinned, it won't be able to move because the bishop will hang, rook will hang. So rook bc8, just coming out of that pin, bishop g4, placing more pins, f5 stopping that pin, bishop h5 attacking the rook. So white is delivering punch after punch after punch now. So rook e d8, bishop f3, bishop f8, just getting out of this. So if bishop takes, the queen will take, the queen won't be overloaded. Bishop e5, so now taking strong claim into the center. The idea is to exchange the bishops and then play f4. So there he plays b6, try to undermine this minority. So a takes and c takes. So if position simplifies, then black will try to create a passed pawn on the a file. Bishop takes d5 with check, queen takes d5, queen a4 attacking the b7 pawn, rook d7 defends the pawn, rook bc1, rook cd8 doubling on the d file, and now rook c6 taking the c file with the help of this pawn. So already white is having an upper hand in this position, and here I think Hikaru makes a mistake. He plays f4. Possibly could have played rook e8 and tried to play this rook here. Maybe that would have been better, but it still would have been difficult for black to convert that. f4, because now this pawn drops. G takes f4, and what does it do? I was unable to understand. Perhaps he was trying to play queen f3 and try to do a perpetual check, maybe, but bishop d6 was played. Maybe if he had played queen f3, and then rook would have come here, could have put more pressure on this square, maybe, who knows. So bishop d6, queen c4 pinning the queen, offering the trade of queens, and now after bishop takes e5, d pawn is attacked twice, so not this but rather this. And look at these pawns, they are way too dangerous indeed. And rook d4, obviously you think that you're winning something, but rook e c1 just reinstating this defense of this rook of the pawn, and this is brilliant. h5, try to make some room through here, king tries to come here, try to hassle these pawns through this way, but this is already too slow. King g2, he activates his king first, king h7, rook takes d4, rook takes d4, king f3, the king has taken a pole position in the center. Look at this king, it is hiding there to no avail. Rook d5 attacks the b pawn, but e6 is just a decoy, because if you take, then e7, and this rook won't be able to come here because the pawn takes control of this. So king g6, he has to play it. Now rook e1 placing the rook behind the pawn, rook d8, e7, rook e8, rook e5, and if a rook cannot take it, because the rook defends it, so he has to play king f6 first, but this allows king e4, rook takes, king takes, and after king f5 Hikaru resigns the game. So the much needed victory came in game number 3 for Dubov, but this was not enough. In fourth game Hikaru had white and he drew that game, which meant that Nakamura won set 1 of the finals. And will tomorrow be the last day of the tournament, or will Dubov be able to push it into the final day? So why did he resign here? If king here, or I should say if king f7, then you simply shut everything on by playing h4. No time to create here because this pawn is far too advanced, and everything is winning for white in this case. But that wasn't enough, as I said, and all eyes will be tomorrow to see whether it turns out to be a final day or we will have a set 3. I hope you like my video. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Cheers. Bye.